So today I decided that I would begin a series of videos about common misunderstandings in left hand technique. Um, as a teacher of the classical guitar style, the majority of difficulty I see in my students, whether they be beginning, intermediate, or advanced, the majority of difficulty I see is actually in the left hand. I know that the right hand is emphasized a lot in this style, but in terms of difficulty, tension, discomfort, most of the time I see that discomfort in the left hand, not so much the right hand. So I thought it would be good to do a series of videos about left hand techniques that often aren't talked about. They're really prevalent in everyone's playing. Anybody who can play well instinctively understand these concepts. But it's often not discussed in method books, and rarely do I see people talk about it online. So I thought it'd be fun to do a number of videos and give out some PDFs of examples in the actual repertoire where these ideas can be applied, and hopefully you'll also find that these ideas help you in your own pieces, because these ideas are prevalent in all pieces from the very beginning level to the very advanced level. So the first part of this series is going to be understanding the different left-hand positions. There are three basic left-hand positions. I'll just read from the PDF here. There are three basic left-hand positions: left, center, and right. And there are subtle variations of each one of those positions. Each position is determined by the arm and wrist, not the fingers. What the fingers can accomplish is fully dependent on the arm and wrist position, which is why we're going to talk about the arm and wrist a lot today. The advantages of each position and examples of them are discussed below. Okay, so there are three basic ideas about the left hand, three basic positions of the left hand. The one that we see in most method books, the what's taught for most people right away, is centered position. And this is centered position. And I call it centered position because my wrist is aligned with my fretboard, and it's looks centered. There's no variation in angle from the fretboard, right? Also, you'll notice that my first finger is quite flat and it's turning right toward the fourth finger, and so between the two it looks like parentheses. Okay, my thumb is under between my first and second finger. This is centered position. This position is designed so that I can play four notes without stretching. Okay, so if anytime I'm doing Segovia scales, I'm going to use this position, or if I'm doing slur exercises, I want to use this position, right? Because it keeps my fingers right over the frets, the four frets that I'm going to be working from. Most exercises are dealing with this centered position. All right. Now, this position being centered, you can, again, the wrist is what we're going to keep talking about. So the wrist is centered. It's aligned with the fretboard. You can see that it's basically a straight line, parallel. To the left is like this. And what a lot of people do is they try to do exercises with the left position like this. So a common mistake for a lot of people is when they're trying to do centered position is they curl their first finger. First finger is actually quite flat in centered position. See? And the first and fourth are facing one another. When I turn like this, the first finger is curled, the fourth finger is not over the fourth fret, right, in this position. How do I get the fourth finger over to the fourth fret? Well, most people stretch. That's not centered position. That's just being to the left. You can see my wrist is to the left, and I'm stretching. What I want to do is turn my wrist. Now my fourth finger reaches no problem. That's correct for centered position. So centered positioning includes Segovia scales, chromatic scales, bar chords, many four-fret passages. Any passages where you're dealing with four frets and you need to stay above four frets, you're going to need your centered position. Many guitar methods only explain the centered position, which is interesting because most music, you need all three positions to play with. So here's the first example, which is the Biancofiore. I'll do it slow. So you can notice as I play this, I want my fingers over in centered position because I'm going to be reaching for all these notes, right? I don't want to be like this. No, I want to be ready for all my notes. So, and then here too, notice the centered position keeps me right above the frets I need. Right? And then the bar is centered position. Right? Not this. No. All centered. Notice, centered position keeps my fingers ready for this chord. And this chord. And this chord. Right? So it's not to the left. Let me demonstrate to the left. It's hard. Right? You can see how awkward it is. But centered. Right? And then in the second example, we have the Sagreras Lesson 82, which is a slur study, but it's also a position study. I could start the piece to the left. Notice my wrist is turned, and it's fine. It's not a big deal. However, it's better if you're a little centered. You get a better slur. Right? Instead of to the left where it rubs, you get more of a pluck if you're centered. And then this needs to be centered. Why? It's covering 4 frets. Right? Not this. Doesn't work. You have to be centered. So the wrist is centered. Staying centered here. Then we're to the left. Right? We'll talk about that in a second. But this centered. And you can see all my fingers are ready to go by keeping that position. That has very little to do with my fingers and much more to do with the position. If I turn to the left, my 4th finger won't be over this fret. Right? Which is very common. A lot of people stretch from the left. No, center the position and then the fingers expand by themselves. Right? And then this is to the left. We'll get to that next. So these are both 2 good examples of centered positioning. Like I said, Segovia scales also centered position, chromatic scales. Most exercises that you'll see in books are going to be centered position. And most method books talk about centered positioning. So you can certainly look in a method book and find examples of that. Now we go to the next position, which is to the left. Now when I say to the left, what I mean is the wrist turns toward the headstock. That's to the left, right? So centered is here, the wrist is parallel, and then to the left, like this. Now to the left, we have different degrees to the left, as we have different degrees of everything. You know, sometimes it's not totally centered, sometimes it's not totally to the left. There's lots of degrees for this. But basically the left positioning contracts the fingers together so there is less horizontal stretch. The more I turn to the left, the more my fingers want to come together, right? Obviously. This contraction is very useful for many pieces in C major or A minor, for example, and all chords or passages where we need more than one finger to share a fret. So when you're dealing with passages like in the soar here, this is Opus 60, number 13, he's got 3rd finger, but he's also using the 4th finger for the higher strings on the same fret, right? 3rd and 4th fingers share the same 3rd fret. So if I'm centered, this isn't going to work very well, obviously, right? Even though this might be the position the method book tells me to do, this is not going to work for this basic little piece. I need to be a little bit to the left so that my 4th finger and my 3rd finger share the same fret. And it's very common. I mean, if you're playing in C major, this is typically what you need to know. And like I said before, most beginning pieces are in C major or A minor, simply because there's not that many sharps or flats. It's easier to read. But the position is to the left. It's not centered like this. It's to the left, slightly to the left. So in this piece, you can see the fourth finger and the third sharing frets, right? Sharing the third fret. And this is very comfortable. Right? And he goes on. Third finger on the fifth string, fourth on the second. And then notice this. That's a D7 chord. Notice that the second and third are sharing the same fret, so I have to turn here. Let me approach that again. Turn, and then getting back. Right? So that being to the left here is important. We're sharing frets. When you're sharing a fret between two fingers, you have to be a little to the left. Otherwise, they're going to want to be like this. If I want 3 and 4 on the same fret, I have to be slightly to the left. Slightly. It might be just a minuscule amount. But if I'm centered, this is very uncomfortable. It's not designed for centered position. This is what's supposed to be happening. To the left helps me contract easily and comfortably. Right? Or if I have something radical like this, right? F, B flat, D, and G. I'm sharing the third fret with all my fingers. That's going to be all the way to the left. Notice how much more I have to turn to the left to make the contraction happen. Right? So these are interesting concepts, and you want to take a look at in your pieces and see if you're making things difficult by not contracting, or perhaps by over-contracting. I'm not sure. Another example is the Villalobos Prelude 3. And it does this, which I do the Segovia fingering, which is here. This is centered, right? You can see it. 4 frets. And then he goes up here and to the left. I also bring my thumb way up for this. But the important thing is to recognize that if I'm not to the left, my fingers won't quite line up the way I want them to. I want them to line up all on that 12th fret, 2, 3, and 4. And then stay there. Right? To the left. See this? And then later on, if you know the piece, he does this, which is centered position. And then if you go to this chord, it's going to be slightly to the left. Why? Because 3 and 4 share the same fret again. So I have to turn a little bit to make this comfortable. Not like this. That's not the turn I'm looking for. I'm looking for that. Just a little turn. Okay. So that's left positioning. And then the final one, which is probably the most interesting because no one ever talks about it. I don't know why. But the final one is right positioning. And right positioning is used whenever you need to sort of give your fourth finger a little help in reaching bass notes, for example. Fourth finger is shorter on most people's hands, I'm assuming. From everybody I've met, their fourth finger is shorter. So instead of doing a chord, like this is D major, second position, instead of trying to do it, like this to the left, you can turn a little bit to the right. You can see my wrist turn a little bit and help my fourth finger reach, right? So that turning to the right is very helpful, especially in pieces like in D major, where you have a lot of D major chords like this. The Milan Pavan 6 is a good example. Now, the Pavan 6, at this point, we're going to explore all the positions, so I'll call them out. But we start off to the left. I'll get this guitar in tune. Okay, so we start off to the left because I'm sharing these 2 frets, or I'm sharing the fret with 2 fingers, right? Slightly to the left, and then centered, right? And then back to the left. Centered, left, now right. See how I turn to the right? So left, right, to the left, centered, left. Why? Because there's a contraction here, right? right. You see that big turn. Centered. Right if I need it, just a little bit. Left. Even more. And back slightly to the left. It's just a... But the important thing when I do this is don't really look at my fingers. Look at my wrist, because my wrist is affecting my fingers completely. Not like a little bit, totally. Okay? So let me do it again, slowly. Left, centered, left. Centered, left, right, left, centered. Left, right. Centered, a little bit to the right, left, even more, and back. Relax. Let me do it without me saying anything. Okay, it's a beautiful example of how the wrist helps. Now, if I don't do any of that, it gets very complicated. So if I try to keep my wrist, this I'm going to have to be to the left. There's no way. But if I don't turn to the center here, I have problems with the bar. All right? Check this out. That's me trying to reach without my wrist helping. See? Very difficult. This is most of the time pretty normal. Here's another example. A lot of people can't get this. Why? Because they're to the left here. See how I'm to the left and I can't reach with my forefinger. All I have to do is push my wrist to help this. Another one where often people will be like this and then but to the right a little bit, right? And then back. And then another thing that right positioning helps us with is fingering behind the notes that we're playing. This is an example in Brouwer 8. In Brouwer 8, he has the second finger fixed on the A sharp here, right? And then notice he's got the G behind the second finger with the third finger. Now there's only one way I can do that comfortably, which is turn my wrist to the right so that my third finger wants to go behind too. That's the only way I can do it. If I don't turn, it's just going to feel weird, or I'm going to play G sharp. I've seen students do that. But you have to turn to get to the G natural. And then to the left a little bit, centered, to the right. And then these are to the left. Why? I'm sharing the same fret, right? So when I go to the left, my fingers align to the frets, and I'm able to share the frets between the fingers. So that's a really cool example of backward fingering, right? It's very fun to play around it with these ideas. So on the last page of the PDF, I wrote out an exercise, and this is for you to explore the positions and understand how the wrist and the arm works in terms of contracting and expanding your fingers. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to start in fifth position. I've written it out both in notation and in tablature. So if you're having problems reading the notation, feel free to use the tablature. Sometimes with these more abstract studies, it's better to just look at the tablature and you get the idea quick. But basically, we're in fifth position, and we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4 in centered position, right? And that's on the fourth, third, second, and first string. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4, 3, 2, 1 strings. And we start off with this chord, and then what we're going to do is we're going to turn from centered position, which is what we should be on right now, and we're going to turn slightly to the left and bring 4 back. Not the others stay. And then the next chord, we're going to bring 4 and 3 back. And you can see how when I bring my wrist, my fingers move. I'm not doing this. I'm not trying to just pull my fingers. I'm using the wrist to pull the finger, right? And then finally, all the fingers on the same fret. And you can see how much to the left I am. So this is not about the fingers moving. The fingers will move. But you're not just moving fingers. This isn't this. No, it's not that. The wrist moves these fingers. And even more. Right? The more you turn the wrist, the more your fingers are going to move. That's the point of the exercise. And then back. Right? And the first one is the 2, 3, 4. And then we do 4 and 3. And then finally we push 4. Okay? And we should get back to basically a centered position. That's the exercise. That's the first part of the exercise. Then we do the backward. Now we practice to the right. This was to the left and centered, right? Centered, left, centered. Now we're going to start centered. And the next line is the right side at the exercise. So we start off with this as a major 7th chord, basically centered position. It might be a slightly to the right because of the 4th finger reach, but mostly this is centered position. Should feel comfortable and easy to reach these notes. And then we start turning to the right. You can see how I turn from here to here. And then 2 fingers come up. And then all 3 fingers come up. So now all these fingers are sharing the same fret, the 8th fret. And they're only doing that because my wrist is this way. If you're having problems doing this, which a lot of people do, just keep seeing if you could find a way to get the wrist in line so that the fingers do this. And then on the way back, whoops, we have this first. And then all 3 come down. And then 2 come down. And then finally 1 comes down. Okay, so we have this, and now turn to the right, and turn to the right, and even more. And then back down. And then this, and then finally this. Okay, so both those exercises are very helpful for people to understand how the wrist affects the technique of the left hand. And this is very, very important to understand if you're dealing with positions and chords that are just difficult and strenuous on your hand. I can guarantee you, if you're having problems, if your fingers feel like they are working overtime, it's possible that your wrist and your arm is not helping them with their job. And so the excessive amounts of stretching to notes, that's often a wrist issue. And I do have to tell people, let's take a look a little bit more closely. Don't assume it's just your talent. Let's not assume that you're just not designed to play the guitar that well. That's not helpful. What is helpful is taking a look and saying, well, maybe we're missing something here. Maybe it's beyond the fingers. Maybe I need to look at it on a more holistic level, right? The arm level. Let's take a look there, see if there's anything that can be done. And if you start looking there, you're going to find a lot of interesting ideas for technique. And you'll also probably find, as I do, that a lot of technical problems gets taken care of, not from the base of the fingers, but from beyond the fingers, the wrist and the arm. So I hope this first PDF is helpful and is interesting, and we'll do more soon. There'll be more parts to this. There's a lot I can talk about with the left hand, and there's a lot of misunderstandings with the left hand. So hopefully I'll do more videotaping soon, and we'll continue our journey. Thanks for watching.